December 31st, 2019, we were getting ready for a new decade. But as things would turn out, it would go really bad. 7 days later, the world learned of COVID-19. 7 million lives were lost, and the rest is history.
COVID-19.
Positive for COVID.
And more than 1,000 died from the virus.
As terrible as it was, this was actually the most successful case we had in fighting a pandemic. And a big part of that success is thanks to AI. We do have one question in mind. If another pandemic hits, how many more lives can we save with AI? You're watching QualiaZ, and this is AI for Dummies. But before tackling that, let's look at how we used to deal with pandemics. And you know, it's kind of crazy to think about we have vaccines right now, but in the past, we literally used to pray our way for healing. Let us take a look. This is the Black Death. It lasted for 7 years and killed almost half of Europe's population. Our first attempt to fight this was with religion and horoscope. I'm serious, because apparently Mars and Jupiter aligning made the air bad, and the solution to not get sick was apparently to don't get sweaty. That's about it. But the casualties were still rising. We needed something. We needed a better solution to make sure that the number goes down. And we found it in Italy. Based on observation and religious teaching, ships that sailed to Italy back then had to stay in docks for 40 days before being allowed to step foot into the region. This was called quarantena, the origin and the beginning of public health procedure that we still practice today, quarantine. The next big pandemic was influenza. Initially, it lasted for only 2 years, but it killed more people than the World War I combined. And the reason it got so bad is because we let it happen. Back then, news about the flu would be censored because countries at war didn't want their soldiers to lose their morale, and so it spread across the globe. And Spain was actually the first country to report it since they were neutral in the war. Unfortunately for them, people started calling it the Spanish flu. Pretty bad reputation. Anyways, we had some luck in battling against the disease with existing practices like wearing gloves, masks, and quarantine. But we still lost many lives. Clearly, this needed some stronger solution that really slowed things down. And so this incident kickstarted the study into microorganisms like bacteria, like viruses, and also modern medicine. And this led us to January 9th, the Wuhan virus is the newest threat. China reported it first, so it became the Wuhan virus. It's got this name because of the convention, place, and name, but this time the people aren't really wrong. COVID-19 is the most dangerous pandemic we face because of its speed and the world we live in. Every day there are thousands of planes flying across the globe. With a virus that spread by just breathing, this virus can spread dangerously fast. It was sort of fortunate because the number is much lower than that of previous pandemics. Like, just imagine a world where influenza and the Black Death didn't happen. This virus would have spread it without us making a move or responding, and somewhere in someone's bedroom, somebody is praying for the stars to align to cure COVID. Here's an important lesson we learned throughout the pandemics. Prevention is better than cure. And one of the most common ways to prevent is vaccination. But learning about vaccines can be a pain, so a writer, Weird, has found a simpler way to break this down in less than 30 seconds. Imagine a virus as a burglar. They want to infiltrate your house or your bodies, and they will do so with their own tools or antigens. To stop them, vaccine makers will need to know what that tool looks like. And then they'll introduce a weaker version of this burglar into our own bodies. Our bodies will learn to recognize the tool, and then we'll make our own counter tool to fight it. And so at this point, if the real burglar were to show up, we already have the blueprint and know how to fight it. And for COVID-19, we actually had AI to help us make the vaccines. Now, we know that COVID belongs to the coronavirus family. We also know that their antigens are called spike proteins. The problem is, we don't know what it looks like. Traditionally, researchers will spend months, years trying to find the structure of this spike protein. But with AI, the designing of the Moderna vaccine took 42 days, ready to be tested. But when and how did we learn to make the vaccine for COVID-19 in the first place? Let's hear it from Professor Andrew from Wien University.
If we can talk about mRNA vaccination, which seems to become the most successful one of those vaccines, the technology was already proven. It was already there because mRNA vaccines had been considered for use against cancers, but without actually ever being proven very successful and actually without ever being rolled out at scale. But there was a proven technology which was basically sitting around waiting to be used. Dare I say, COVID-19 provided the opportunity to actually trial at scale. The value of AI, I would say, is in terms of data processing, and it accelerates the process. It doesn't necessarily enhance the process, but the labor-intensive processes involved. As a predictive tool, it won't say, hey, this is the silver bullet, this will work as a vaccine. It's a beautiful tool for screening. It filters out what is unlikely to be effective and identify potential targets. The whole process becomes more effective in terms of, okay, let's test this as a potential vaccine candidate.
Okay, so if AI can speed up the process of making a vaccine, in theory, we should have a vaccine ready in a week, maybe a day, and maybe in the future, just like that. And if COVID-19 were to happen, maybe it won't even be a pandemic because we already have the vaccine. I mean, if you think about it, it's pretty amazing. Not really. Even with the designs ready, researchers can't mass produce millions of vaccines and then ship it to people around the world. In order to do that, they need... Have you ever wondered how they test for vaccines? Here's a simplified version. In the first phase of testing, the vaccines will be given to a small group of participants first to make sure that it works, and only when it shows positive signs will the researchers move on to larger population groups. And here is how things work. Participants will be split into two groups, one given the real vaccine and the other one given a placebo. And they're simply sent back to live their lives and occasionally check in to measure the data. But how will researchers know that the vaccines they're testing will work on everybody of every demographics? Researchers have actually thought about this. They have selected the most diverse group of participants for each group, both the placebo group and the vaccine group. At every stage and step, researchers have went out of their way and think of everything possible to make sure that the trials are accurate, to make sure that the vaccines can actually save millions of people. Okay, this whole thing may sound a little overcomplicated, but if it's for saving lives, wouldn't you think it is necessary? Let's take a detour. In 1950, a polio vaccine was rushed without the proper check or the safety procedures. The result? Several children were paralyzed and some even died from this false vaccine batch. So again, it is complex, but it is necessary for us to have these steps in place to protect the lives of people. But this is not the end of the story, because there is also... Good news, we actually have the vaccines now. Bad news, it's really delicate. Apparently, to keep a Pfizer vaccine usable, you need to keep it in ultra-cold temperatures. I'm talking -80 degrees Celsius. You know how many countries in the world can afford to buy millions of vaccines and keep it in that exact condition? 18. Only 18 countries in the world had access to vaccines because of this reason. Oh, and did you know there's also an expiration date to the vaccines? Imagine spending so much money getting the vaccines into your home country, but then having it expired on the shelf because you couldn't distribute it in time. This actually happened. In Nigeria, they had to withdraw 1 million doses of vaccines because of this reason. At the end of the day, it's not about designing and creating vaccines, but also the trials and the tests and the distribution of those vaccines that makes it count. Along the way, we can speed things up here and there, but the steps, we cannot get rid of it. It is for our own safety that we go through this process. Does this mean this is the best we can do, or is there a gap that we can expand on? This is something that I really want to know, so I reached out to Professor Michelle from Wien University.
I think COVID taught us that you need multiple different kinds of science to solve problems. So there's the basic biologist who came up with the technology, discovered this is the epitope we need to target, this is the technology we can use, but that doesn't cure anybody. You need somebody who actually has manufacturing expertise to develop the vaccine, and then you need people who are clinical trialists to develop how do we test this quickly to make sure it's safe before we give it to the entire country. And then you need people who know how to implement large-scale vaccine things. And then you need people that can do the post-marketing or post-vaccine follow-up to make sure it actually does protect you. So it's a very complex process. Where I think AI helps is it can speed up the steps by allowing you to efficiently narrow in on what are the key things we need to think about at each of those steps. Even before AI, medicine has evolved in a way that, like what I spent the last 5 years of my life doing from a clinical perspective didn't even exist when I was a medical student. Like I ran a CAR T cell, so that's where you take cells out of the body, engineer them, to recognize cancer cells, put them back in the patient. That didn't exist when I was a medical student. I developed a program and led that at my former university, but that's how science kind of works. So I think in some ways, it's just happening at a much more rapid scale than it has historically with AI, which is exciting.
COVID-19 was our best effort in fighting pandemics in our history, but can we improve? What if there's a way we can actually prevent future pandemics from happening, essentially just erasing several future timelines where we have to go through another COVID? Based on a recent paper featured on Nature, if there's enough data, AI will be able to essentially anticipate when the next outbreak happens. And even if it leads to an epidemic or pandemic, AI will also be able to predict where it will spread and how fast and how many people will be infected. But at the end of the day, it's prediction. For example, Blue Dot initially made some warnings about the outbreak in Wuhan, China, but when it comes to reporting, documenting, and communication to officials and the WHO, AI won't protect us. It is up to us to actually act on those suggestions and predictions to really fight against diseases. Maybe with better AI in the future, the existing logistic and legal system may change. But if we keep our number one priority in mind, which is protecting human lives, all innovation is welcome. This is also the message in one of the oldest teachings in the medical world, the Hippocratic Oath. The texts have changed over time, but in spirit, most physicians follow this one fundamental rule. Patient's life and safety comes first. And I think this also is the main motivation behind all of the progress we've made in history, from praying to mask, quarantine, vaccine, and now artificial intelligence. Everything is done in the spirit of protecting human lives. AI won't be the magical cure, as it also requires our collaboration, our experience, and our planning to really have a chance against Mother Nature. And if a new pandemic does arrive in December 31st, 2029, we'll be prepared to deal with it.
If you'd asked me before the pandemic whether we could produce a vaccine in less than a year, I would have laughed, quite frankly. It really impressed me how the global community came together to do that. There's open sharing of data and information in a way on a scale that was never possible before. Perhaps was slightly disappointing was the rollout of the vaccine and the inequities regarding that. Making a vaccine, making a treatment is one thing, but actually getting it to the people who need it most is another thing.
Many of us are motivated by wanting to make life better for people, improving quality of life, even more important than improving quantity, but how do we help people live as well as they can for as long as they can? Improve overall health and well-being of a society that raises everybody up, right? To me, that's the big motivator. I'm a pediatric oncologist by training. I really hate going to funerals. And so, motivated by, can I cure every kid that comes into my office? And if I can't, how do I help them live as well as they can for as long as they can? And I think that drives a lot of us.
Throughout the series, we have explored how humanity is building AI that can match and replicate our abilities in different aspects of lives. But the current trend of AI research is heading towards artificial general intelligence, or AGI. An AI that not only match but exceed humans in most aspects in different fields. And what if there is a future where AI can coexist with us? What will it take to turn this reality into something real? Will AI become a colleague, a partner, a tool, or something completely different? take things with a grain of salt, always challenge the status quo. And as always, catch you next time.